Education is a privilege. Please raise your hand if you agree with this. If you raise your hand, know that you and I have something in common. They believe that education is indeed a privilege. Even though the United Nations claims that education should be a right available for everyone who wishes to transform the world through knowledge, millions of people can access education at all. Now, please raise your hand if you have attended elementary or secondary school and consider yourself to have a basic understanding of both math and reading. Thanks. If you raise your hand, you're more fortunate than 250 million children who are out of school and over 600 million children who are unable to attain minimum proficiency levels in both math and reading. Education is crucial for new generations to acquire the skills needed to escape the cycle of poverty. Education allows for conscious citizens who can act, contribute, and innovate for the betterment of society. And education diminishes inequality and allows for a more peaceful world. Through your education, you've had the opportunity to acquire some of the skills and knowledge needed to build a bright future. These are the same skills that millions of children wish for, but because of not having access to education, are unable to develop in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and all over the world. This problem raises concerns for entire governments and organizations. It raises my concern, and I truly hope it raises your concern as well. I am from Guatemala. Though it's known for being a place that is stagnated in time with its ancient Maya ruins and legacies, Guatemala is also home to a country stagnant in development. The lack of quality and the lack of access to education have been concerns for decades. According to the CEPAL, the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, rural areas and indigenous communities tend to receive education of poor quality and resources in urban areas. And this reality, described by the CEPAL, only gets worse and worse as you travel far away from Guatemala City. And every time, even fewer Guatemalan children can access school. So if we want our country to change and children have opportunities, we need better education. Now, there are different factors that impact the efficient education system in Guatemala, a country where almost half of the teenagers are out of school. First, teachers are not prepared to teach students. They are not prepared themselves. According to the National Economic Research Center, or CIEN for its acronym in Spanish, only 50% of the reading questions were answered correctly in a national test for prospective teachers, and only 37% in math. If these are the futures of new generations, how are students expected to learn from teachers who are not prepared themselves? They can't. In the National High School Graduate Test Course, for example, in 2019, only 11% of the students reached the minimum level in math, and only 37% of them reached the minimum level in reading. To set an image of our proportions, that would mean that out of the 100 people sitting here today, or all of you, only 11 of you would have reached a minimum level in math, and only 35 of you would have reached a minimum level in reading. Okay, so setting statistics aside for a moment, please raise your hand if you know the game Chinese Whispers or Teléfono Descompuesto for my Guatemalan friends. In Chinese Whispers, for those whose hands were down, by the way, Chinese Whispers is a very simple game. Players form a line, and the first player comes up with a message, and then this player shares the message to the third player, and the fourth player, and so on. In Chinese Whispers, the starting word will not be anything like the ending word, because there is a cycle that begins with repeating the wrong word. And just like in Chinese Whispers, in Guatemalan education, there is a cycle that begins with repeating, with teachers learning incomplete knowledge to the students. And then these students who receive that learning distorted and poorly will then be teaching another generation even poorer and more distorted education. And then the generation will repeat the same process, and this will happen over and over again. And every time this happens, every generation receives a worse quality of education due to the lack of preparation of teachers. And at what point is this messed up thread still considered education? Now, alongside the lack of preparation of teachers, another factor that negatively impacts education is extreme inequality. Let me give you some examples. First, there is the indigenous educational gap. In our country, indigenous adults tend to receive an education length of about 5.7 years. But in contrast, indigenous adults tend to receive less than half of that time in education, with 2.5 years. Second, there is a gender educational gap. According to the 2018 census, only 75% of women are literate, compared to an 83% of men. And that 7%, trust me, does make a difference. And third, there is the economic background educational gap. Alongside attending schools with scarce resources, poor children also have to face malnutrition, hurting their neurological abilities. According to the USAID, malnourished children tend to learn slower and drop out of school. So it's not only that the schools offer poor education, but the students also have to face external factors that limit their capacities to take advantage of the scarce opportunities they have. With all these barriers that limit children's learning, it's clear that the education system in Guatemala is stagnant. Instead of children having the possibility to go to school, they are faced with needs. Needs that seem like they can only be fulfilled by going to the middle of the streets to sell candies or perform when the traffic lights are on red. So what can Guatemala do to improve and provide the necessary education system? I may not be a political scientist, an economist, or an educational expert, but I am a student. I am a student who has witnessed both the good and the bad of the education system. Around 3 years ago, I studied at a school with limited resources. For many years, the academic record barely improved. In all grade levels, math consisted of sets, even though the class required more advanced material. My English classes consisted of basic verbs and pronouns, without any truly useful lessons. But in ninth grade, I acquired a scholarship that required me to give up everything I used to know. But in exchange, it gave me access to opportunities that only a few people in my country could afford. Suddenly, I was presented with an array of clubs, sports, resources, and venues at my new school. Basic algebra was now just a foundation for me to take calculus at a college level. I was amazed by opportunities I did not know existed in my own country. So we want more children to escape the cycle of poverty and develop as individuals to contribute to our society. We need better education. How? This can be through our government investing with more in education, with transparency, of course. Guatemala invests only 2.8% of its GDP in education, whereas Costa Rica, a country very similar to Guatemala, both geographically and culturally speaking, doubles that investment with around 6% of its GDP. Costa Rica is one of the leaders in Latin American education. Their educational achievements have contributed to their high levels of growth and well-being. So why have not they learned from their successes and mistakes? In Guatemala, increased investment in education could fund meaningful teacher training programs that enhance subject proficiency and introduce new learning methods. Additionally, this investment could improve access to education for students living in faraway communities by providing remote learning tools and by providing the necessary infrastructure like transportation. However, addressing all these barriers like race, economic background, or gender inequality requires not only societal commitment, not only government action, but also a societal commitment to change. As citizens, we have the responsibility to ensure that the future of our country is better than the present. And to all the students listening, I tell you that we already have the power to make a meaningful impact right now. For instance, my school or our school already offers a peer tutoring program that assists students within our school community. This program could be expanded so that our students could go and teach disadvantaged kids around Guatemala City in orphanages. Our students could be providing valuable instruction to children who haven't had the opportunity to even learn the basics of the language. Additionally, the united effort of our clubs could raise funds to subsidize extracurricular activities for students from undermined communities, allowing them to explore new opportunities and access schools and access skills beyond their current circumstances. As citizens, as Guatemalans, we need to have an open mind and accept that all individuals, regardless of who they are or where they come from, can transform as much as anybody else our country. Due to inequity and discrimination in education, a country does not move a single step forward, but rather 3 steps back. If the country, if the government and institutions and we as citizens change for the better, and we acknowledge our crucial role in an evolving society, perhaps a country with a better education system is not such a crazy dream. Perhaps in the future, we could see Guatemalan children that, regardless of their social or cultural condition, can access education, and that even if it's not equal, it's good enough to give them a promising future. As I leave you today, I ask you to remember 3 things. First, treasure education you receive. Second, use that education not just for your own success, but also to uplift those around you. And third, as my parents always remind me, if we can give you nothing else, the greatest gift we can offer you is the gift of education. Thank you.